Hi everyone, welcome to this course on Vuetify, a Vue material framework. I want to share a little bit about me to get started. My name is Faraday. I'm a software developer and online content creator. I have a pretty unique name, so you can find me anywhere online if you look for Gwen Faraday. On Twitter, my blog, which is gwenfaraday.com, and I also have a YouTube channel called Faraday Academy. I want to go over some of the main topics that are going to be covered in this course. Of course, Vuetify is a Vue UI framework, and like most JavaScript UI frameworks, it comes with a grid system to help you lay out your pages, as well as over 80 components built in Vue for you to use out of the box. It also has classes and features to support responsive design, typography, styling, and other types of customization. We will not be able to cover every single component in the entire framework, but after this course, you should have a pretty good idea about what the framework can do and know the main components so you can go ahead and get started building with it. If you are watching this course on scrimba.com, then I highly encourage you to pause the video throughout the lessons and play with the code yourself by editing and making your own changes. If you are watching this code elsewhere, then I still hope you follow along and try the examples out for yourself. Before you start this course, you should have some basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as the basics of how Vue JS works. You should at least be familiar with templates and how JavaScript interacts with those templates in Vue JS, as well as the basics of how components work. If you need to learn Vue or need to brush up on the basics, there is an excellent free Vue JS course on scrimba.com. All of the code from this course is included in these two repositories on GitHub for you to download and try out for yourself. In the next video, I'm going to show you an overview of what we're going to be building in this course.
Vuetify. In this video, I want to briefly cover what material design is, since it's really the basis for the whole Vuetify framework. Material design is a standard that was developed by Google for implementing accessible, user-friendly interfaces. Google launched this standard in 2014, stating that it was based off of ink and paper design, but also flexible enough to be implemented in a wide variety of use cases. The material standard provides a set of rules for all of the most common elements that you find on web pages, like buttons, text, and navigation, in addition to advanced use cases in digital interfaces such as movement and elevation. Vuetify abstracts away all of the implementation of this standard from you. It provides you with a mixture of markup, CSS, and JavaScript in the form of nicely packaged UI elements that you can just plug into your Vue JS application. Using Vuetify, you can be sure that you are following these design and accessibility guidelines of the material standard. If you do want to learn more about material design, I highly recommend you check out material.io/design for a more complete breakdown of what it provides. Roboto. So let's start by taking a look at some Vuetify code. Right now, I'm pulling in both Vue.js and Vuetify from their CDNs. For Vuetify's default configuration, I'm also pulling in the Roboto font from Google Fonts, as well as material design icons. And then, of course, here are my Vuetify CSS styles. Now, while all this is being pulled in via CDNs, Vuetify components will work the exact same way whether you're using the CDN or the NPM module. The only difference will be a little bit in how you set it up. As you can see here, when I instantiate my Vue application, I add a Vuetify property here, and then create a new Vuetify object, where you can optionally pass some options in here as well, such as themes and color palettes. Going back to the root of our application, you can see all of the Vuetify components start with V-. That's how you know it's from the Vuetify library. If we go into the playground file, you'll notice a lot of elements that start with V-. The very first element that you need in a Vuetify application is this V-app. This is the root component for all Vuetify applications, and all Vuetify components must fall within V-app. v-content also wraps your page's content. By default with Vuetify, this means that v-content will set up the app to use Flexbox and set the display to flex here along with some other layout properties. Usually you will see this wrap page content with global header and footer elements falling outside of the v-content element wrapper. Since this application is just a single page, I've nested everything inside of v-content. And let's take a look. This is just a page to show some of the Vuetify basics before we dive into the shop application. And we'll be covering each of these sections as we go along in the next few videos. Each of the sections in the browser correspond to one of these components here that are imported into Playground. For example, Typography is where we will learn about Vuetify's default type settings and classes that you can optionally apply to your headers and other text on the page. Note that these are regular HTML elements, but Vuetify strips all of the default styles from these elements to use its own styles and gives you classes to optionally add to Vuetify's default styles. Now these are from the class API, but you'll see many Vuetify components pre-built like vcard text that will handle rendering HTML and classes to the DOM for you. We are also going to look at how to interact with Vuetify components and customize them using props, events, and slots throughout the next videos. So let's dive in and get started looking at typography in Vuetify. Things categorized. Vuetify provides a lot of classes to handle typography on your page. You can see an example of some different varieties here, from different headings categorized as display 1 through 4, titles, subtitles, as well as body text. Note that all the styles you see here come from this Vuetify class. It overwrites any styles that the browser might apply to this h1 tag, for example. If I remove this class, you'll see it's just a regular browser header. I'm going to put the class back. And if I change an h2 to have the same class as an h1, let me give them both display 4. And you see, even though one is an h2 and one is an h1, they both have the same size and weight, etc. The only difference is the amount of padding for the main h1 display and an h2, which is closer to any text nested below it. I'll change this back. Another set of classes that Vuetify gives us for handling text has to do with the text color and background. I could enter any color here, let's say purple, and it will give my text a purple background. If I want to change the text color, I just need to put the color name, yellow, -- text. This works for about 20 standard colors and is able to be easily customized to include hundreds of different shades of colors through accompanying classes like lighten and darken. I'm going to get rid of purple here, and then let's darken this yellow text by saying text -- darken -1. And you can see the yellow text is slightly darker. Let me move it to 2. And now it's more of an orangey, and so on. Vuetify also has a lot of predefined classes that have to do with the font weight and font style of your text. For example, I will remove this class. And you can see it's a regular bold header. And now I'm going to put font weight regular. Changed it to have the regular font weight. I can also use light here. Now you can see it changed it to light. You can use medium, bold, black, etc. There is also the option to make the font italic. Now you can see it's a regular header made italic. And then you can combine these with font weight. So now I could say font weight light. And now it's both italic and light. And there are many more classes to work with. One interesting thing I want to show you is that it has a built-in truncate class. So I'm going to grab this header and just paste it a few more times. Now you can see that it goes on for a while. But if I want to truncate that, all I have to do is say text truncate, and it gives me the 3 dots, so it won't overflow the container. One thing to note and remember is that some of the classes use one dash and some use two. For example, I could use a text transformation, text uppercase, and now this is all uppercase, and this is just one dash. But if you want to change the opacity of the text, it has two dashes. So I could say primary, which is a very bold color, secondary, you can see is a bit lighter, and then disabled, which is grayed out text. In the next video, we'll see some of the spacing options that Vuetify provides. First, I'm going to create. Now let's explore some of the spacing classes that Vuetify offers. By this, I mean margin and padding on elements. Before I show this demo, I want to go over the basic margin and padding classes that Vuetify offers just on this H3 element. First, I'm going to create a class, and then Vuetify uses an abbreviation to say margin or padding. So you'll use M for margin or P for padding. In this case, I'm going to do margin, and then you have 7 different options for telling it where to put the margin. For example, T, you can say, I want my margin on top. You could say B for bottom, R for right, L for left. If you want it on both the right and the left, you would use X. Top and bottom, you would use Y. And then if you want it on every side, you can use A. And these abbreviations are the same for margin or padding. So let's say I want margin left. Then I have the option to use the numbers 1 through 12. Each number corresponds to a 4-pixel increment. So if I say margin left of 1, it really means a margin left of 4 pixels. And let me save that. And you can see an ever so slight move there. Let me do something more extreme of 5. And you can see it's really moved over now. You also have the option of doing a negative margin. So let me put this all the way at 12, save it. It's all the way over here. And now if I want a negative margin, I can also use 1 through 12, but I can prefix it with an N. So negative 12, which is negative 48 pixel margin. And you can see now it's off the page because it applied a negative margin. You can also use this to give an element a margin of auto to center it. To do this, I need to make sure my element has a container that spans the page. So I'm just going to wrap this in a row real quick. And we're going to get into grids in a later lesson. And now I will get rid of this negative margin. To center it, I'm going to give it a margin right and left of auto. And now it's centered across the page. I can also denote different spacing for different sizes here using Vuetify's breakpoint classes. I'm going to say, save this first. Now it's back at the beginning. I'm going to say a margin left of 12, which gives it a margin left. But now if I say only for small screens and up, it goes all the way back to the left because this is an extra small screen size. But if I make the screen bigger, you can see once it gets to a small screen, it gives me the margin. And I can use this on extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large screen sizes, which are standard sizes used for different device types. This is an interactive playground that I encourage you to play around with to get used to these concepts in Vuetify. You can change the padding type to top, bottom, left, right, just as I explained. And you can see the green lines for where the padding is. You can do the same thing with margin and see the orange for where the margin is. And this is the same syntax that you would be using if you put this into a CSS class, such as margin all of 2. In the next lesson, we're going to go over how buttons can be implemented in Vuetify, as well as some more custom classes that they provide. Outline button. Now let's look at some of the customization and options we have with Vuetify's button component. Vuetify gives you dozens of options out of the box for buttons, including regular clickable buttons, outline buttons having icons, properly positioned, as well as various options for having icon-only buttons. Let's create another button and try some of this out. I'm just going to copy this top one and paste it and change this to say something else, submit. Now this is a default size for common buttons that is calculated by Vuetify. If we want a different size, we can use small or large properties passed into the button. We also have other options, such as saying it's a text button. So it looks like normal text when you hover over it. You can see the outline of a button. For outline buttons, there's another prop called outlined, and it gives you an outline, hover, everything, all of the styles that you would get with a normal button. Now the edges are a little rounded. They have a border radius set, but if I want them all the way rounded, I can say rounded, and it gives me this nice rounded edge without me having to play around with the percentage values. If you don't want the button elevated like this, you can say depressed. Now it's kind of flush with the page. A lot of times you'll want the button to stretch across the width of its container. If so, you can just use the keyword block, and it gives you this nice full width button element. Of course, you can combine any of these props however you want. Also, you have the options to make icons into buttons like we have here. Let me just make this into 2 lines. And I'm going to steal an icon from down here, the pencil. Now it's just one pencil. And I can say, let me get rid of large. And I'll call this icon, which is kind of weird with block because it stretches the whole screen. So I'm going to get rid of the block. Now it looks a little bit better. And it gives you this nice hover property. The only thing is it's a little bit off because here I want the icon moved away from the text. So I'm using this left prop. So if I get rid of the left prop up here, since there's no text next to it, now it's normally centered inside of the hover circle. Now with icons, I also have the option to make this nice fab or floating action button like they have on a lot of modern websites. So I'm going to get rid of icon here. Actually, I'll leave it for 1 second and I'll use the fab property. Now you can see the pencil kind of push everything away further and now has a bigger hover area. Now the reason why it doesn't look elevated like this is because I still have the icon prop here, which as you can see makes it flush with the page. You don't see the background and outline until you hover over it. So I'm going to get rid of icon here. And you can see now it's elevated like the fab down here. So I'm also going to add a color to my floating action button. Like we saw in the previous video, there are a lot of different colors and color variations I can put here. And I also have access to all of the standard built-in material colors, such as error, which gives me this nice red color, or warning, info, etc. Of course, I don't have to use an icon in a floating action button, but that's just what is most commonly used. You can use text, but it really doesn't look good if it's too much text. I've seen some people use abbreviations, and that looks fine. But if you have something longer, of course, it runs out of space. If you want to change the colors on a normal button, use the same classes that we used in the previous lesson. So inside the button, if I give it a red class, you can see that it changed the background here. And then I can come and say that I want white text. And it's an easy way to update the button. One of the great things about Vuetify is that all of the classes that it uses to make these Vue components are available to you to use as well. So if you want a tiled button, one with rounded corners, or a round button with elevation, and even this bubbling that occurs when you click on a button, see how it kind of starts highlighting from the inside and kind of bubbles out? That's also a prop available to you in Vuetify. So let's look at just a little bit of the customization available to you. I'm going to create just a standard HTML button here. Say submit. So this is just an ugly button with even fewer styles than you would in a regular browser. And I'm going to come here and use some of the classes that are available. I'm going to start with elevation and say I want an elevation of 2. Now, elevation works from 1 to 24. So if you have 24, of course, it's going to bring it way off the page and give you a lot of this shadow spread. but I'm just going to say 2. And then, of course, I want some normal padding there. So I'm going to say padding on the y-axis or up and down of 2, and then padding X of 4. That looks a little bit better as a button. But when I click on it, it still gives me the default boring button press. So I can add a prop like V ripple, and now it gives me the same behavior as all of these buttons. So while Vuetify gives you a lot of features out of the box, you can just start with VBTN, use a couple classes to customize it, use a few of these default props, and have a pretty good looking button. But you also have the option to build your own custom buttons and use directives and classes that are available to you in Vuetify. In the next video, we're going to look at some of the menu and navbar components available to you through Vuetify. Of the features of In this video, I want to quickly cover some of the navigation options that we have in Vuetify. Now, I'm not going to go into these too much right now, since we will be covering a navigation bar when we get to the main application for this course. Right now, I'm just going to point out a few of the features of this navigation bar, as well as one gotcha that seems to confuse a lot of people. First off, when you look at the Vuetify documentation, there are 2 navigation elements that are quite similar. One is this V app bar, and the other is called V toolbar. And you'll notice if I swap one for another, I'm just going to put toolbar in here, and then in the closing tag as well. And you see it shows up exactly the same. Then what is the difference between these 2 components? Well, V app bar is meant to be the main navigation in a site. So it includes extra features like scroll animations and more props and options than V toolbar. V toolbar is meant to be a smaller, more versatile component, not necessarily the main navigation for the app, though it can be used as such if you don't need the extra features of V app bar. But it's meant for many other purposes as well. For example, if you're giving your users the ability to do some minor text editing within your app, then you could use a V toolbar with icons representing your basic edit features above your edit window. V toolbar is also used as an overlay on top of things like maps, where you want the user to be able to perform functions like pin and search. Now, a few nice features that both toolbar and app bar provide for you are the automatic sizing of buttons and icons, this V app bar nav icon, which is the 3 bars, which a lot of people use for opening draw menus. And they are also built to handle list dropdowns that can open from buttons, icons, or navigation text. As I mentioned before, we will be using one of these app bars as well as a draw navigation menu in the site that we will build later. In the next video, we're going to go over the grid system in Vuetify and how it can be used for page layout. Similar to other In this lesson, we're going to go over the grid system that is provided in the Vuetify framework. This includes containers like this box, rows, as well as columns. Now, Vuetify's grid system is built in Flexbox, and it's very similar to other CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation. Like I said before, the idea is that you have containers, rows, and columns that can be used to lay out your web page. The grid system in Vuetify is split into 12 columns with 5 media breakpoints built in for you to use to handle different screen sizes. All your most common sizes from extra small phones all the way to 4K TVs. To illustrate the containers, rows, and columns a little bit better, I'm just going to highlight them in CSS. Now, all of this is inside of a vCard, which does add a little bit of padding as well as elevation, which gives you this border feel, raising it off the page. So the container actually starts right here in green. You can see it has its own padding. The rows are in red all the way across. and the columns are split up by the blue lines. And you can see that there's margin and padding associated with each one of these elements. Now let's look at columns. The default way to declare columns is using the calls property. So you write calls and then how many columns you want the element to stretch across the page. For example, it's set to 12 right now, so it will stretch all 12 columns. But if I set this to 6, now it only goes halfway across the page and ends. I'm going to set this back to 12. You can see that by default, there's a certain amount of space put in between columns, both vertically and horizontally. We can remove that through setting properties on the row. So first we can set dense, which you can see more tightly packs them together. And I will set dense here to illustrate that. And if we want to remove that space altogether, you can set a prop called no gutters, and it removed all of the space. So I will set this here as well. Now this removed all of the space in between columns, but there's still space around the container because it has a certain amount of padding. So this is our container element. If you want to change the amount of padding or margin in the container, you can use the same shorthand that you saw in an earlier video about spacing. So if you want to remove all the padding, you can say padding all and set it to 0, then save. And now it's all gone and they are flush up against each other. Notice you didn't have to put it in a class here because vContainer accepts these as props. Another important part of this grid system is breakpoints. Now, the keyword calls applies to all screen sizes. If you want something that only applies to, let's say, small screen sizes and up, not extra small screen sizes, then you can use the small keyword and set it equal to the number of columns that you want from small screen sizes and up. For example, I could say 6 columns here and then save that. And it still stretches across all 12. But if I make this bigger, then you can see that this line comes up when it passes the threshold of small, and then at X small, it disappears again. If you want to create an offset, let's say we want to put this column in the middle on small, we don't want it to just go halfway across the page, then we can come and set a small offset. So we say offset, and then the abbreviation for the screen size, so small equals 3 columns. Since it's going to go across 6 columns and we want to center it, so we'll just push it out with a margin of 3 columns here. So let's try this out. I'll make it bigger and refresh, and you can see that it's centered in the page here. And now if I make it smaller, it's now 12 columns all the way across. And even though we started with calls here, this is actually a given that it will be 12 columns if nothing else is set. So I can get rid of that, and here it breaks and it goes back to 12. So by default, it is across 12 columns, and you can set it for however many columns you want with an offset. Of course, these rows and columns can be continuously nested to get the exact layout of the page that you want. And we will see that in the shop example that we're going to do in a later video. Now, since this grid is built in Flexbox, Vuetify has a lot of the Flexbox syntax built in as props and classes. For example, let me get rid of any one of these 3 columns. Now I just have 2 columns here. And if I want to push these columns away from each other, so I want to put this second column all the way on this side, I can use a Flexbox property called space between. So let me go to the row here and say justify equals space between, save that. And you are able to use these Flexbox methods for both containers and children. Now, if you haven't used Flexbox before or you aren't familiar with the syntax, then I highly recommend you learn some of these terms, especially the container properties like justify and align items, to help you understand a little bit more about how Vuetify works, and so you'll be able to fully use all of its features in your layouts. In the next video, we're going to look at a quick card example as the final element in this playground before we jump into the store application. Vuetify uses a vCard component as the wrapper for any UI card. This component can take props and classes, as well as slots, and has custom events. Now, even though Vuetify has 80-something components in the framework, there are actually many more elements because, for example, vCard here has 4 nested elements you can use. The vCard title, vCard text, there's also a vCard subtitle, and then vCard actions. You can use any of these or none of them depending on the layout you want in your card. Now, these components don't take any props, but they have some of their own spacing and font properties, and they also sometimes change the style of items nested inside of them. So when we look at vCard text, for example, the only thing inside of it is Vue rocks, but there's also a class that is changing or overriding the font styles. So let's get rid of this class. And now you can see the default styles that Vuetify applies for any of the text you write inside of vCard text. Let's compare that with a subtitle. vCard subtitle, and I'll just call this subtitle. And you can see the spacing is very different between the subtitle and the card text. Of course, the subtitle falls right below the title. And let me get rid of the icon in the title so you can see a little bit better, as well as the extra styling on the vCard title. So this is how Vuetify naturally lays out a card. Now, if you look at actions, of course, this card is specifically made as a social media style card. So it has these icons and some type of user feedback, probably likes. And Vuetify can specially size items and position them to make sense for what you would normally use this action area for. So let me get rid of everything in the action, vCard actions. And now we just have a card with plain text. And I'll add a button in here, just a plain V button. Now it looks like a normal button here, but let me add the same button outside of a card. So right above the vCard actions, I'll add the same button, and it's a completely different size. And if I add it completely outside of the card, then it's also a larger size, and the particular color styles of the card aren't applied to it either, since it's outside. So let me get rid of these other 2 buttons. Basically, Vuetify resizes and positions the button to make sense in the card's action area. Now, all of these vCard elements operate on Flexbox. So you can use justify and alignment and all of your regular Flexbox properties. But Vuetify gives you another easy way to align items. So I'm going to use something called a V-spacer. And now the button's positioned on the right. What V-spacer does is take up as much space as possible without pushing other elements off screen or out of the row. So I'm going to take V button and copy it, make another V button. And now you can see that the first V button is positioned regularly to the left, but then V-spacer takes up as much space as it possibly can in between, and then the other button is placed on the right. This is a really useful tool for layouts that can simplify placing items around a page. Now, one thing you'll also notice with Vuetify is that it does a pretty good job of keeping the API clean and consistent across components. For example, this card isn't in its natural state. It's blue with black buttons, but let's remove those properties here. And now you can see there's no color and it's also elevated. So from the button video, you remember we have properties like outlined. So if I pass in the outline prop, it loses elevation and just gives it a border. So you can use props like outlined and tiled or rounded across many different components in Vuetify. This playground that we've been using is here for you to use and try out. It contains all of the components that we've covered over the last several videos: card, grid, menus, buttons, spacing, and typography. So you can uncomment any of these. Let's say typography, and make all of the changes you want, assuming that you are in the Scrimba interface. Glad you made it to the end of the playground lessons, going over some of the basics of Vuetify. In the next video, we're going to start building our store application in Vuetify. So let's dive in and start creating the nav bar. I'll come to Components and Top Nav. You can see here I already have this array of links that I'm going to use in my nav. And if you look at the router.js file, you can see in Vue Router I have all of these routes defined as well that I'm going to use. But only 3 of them will be in the top nav. The rest you'll navigate to from pages in the application. So I'm going to start this component off by using a V app bar component. And I'll save that. And you can see the browser refreshed and it's giving me this massive elevated bar on top. In here, I'm going to put the logo first. We do that with a V toolbar title, and then I'm going to call it Awesome Shop. Save that. And now I'm going to add the toolbar items. So I'm going to come here and say V toolbar items, and then make the closing tag for that. And now I'm going to define each item as a button. So a Vuetify button, which takes a prop called to, which will connect to the Vue router. So for the first one, I'm going to say route to the home page. I'm going to say this is a text button because I don't want it to look like an actual button in the nav bar. And I'm going to have an icon here. So first I'll do V icon, make it small, position it left, and say FA home, which will show me a little house picture for the icon. Now I'm going to give this the name home and then close the BTN. All right, save that. All right, so it's definitely getting there. So let me go ahead and add 2 more of these links. Now the second one is store. So I'm going to route to store and then change this to say store. And then the icon is going to be shopping basket. And then the third one goes to the cart. So cart, and then the icon is shopping cart. All right, save that. It actually looks pretty good. Now we have to add some spacing in between these buttons, bring them to the right, and the logo, which we want to keep on the left. And then we also want to fix the sizing because, of course, we don't want the top nav to come all the way down here. It should stop right below the buttons here. So we can do this a couple different ways, but the sizing is basically off because it's nested directly inside of VApp here. So instead of changing any of the styles, we can just wrap this in a div. Close the div, and then it correctly displays our app bar. Now, the easy way to bring these buttons to the right is to just add the V spacer in here, which you'll remember from when we talked about grids. Save that. And it pushes things on either side of it to the left and the right respectively. So now the app bar looks pretty good. That's what we would expect. But when it gets small, it kind of eats our logo and buttons. So on the extra small mobile size, we actually want to hide all of these buttons here, which we can do through a class, hidden, and then extra small only. So it will only be hidden on the extra small screen size. Let's save that. And now all of the buttons are hidden until we expand it to a small or a medium screen size. So let's create a button that works on mobile only on the extra small screen size that will open up a draw menu for us. I'll come down here. I'll just add an inline tag and say class equals hidden on small and up. So it's only going to show on extra small screens. And then inside of here, I'm going to put a V button. I'm not going to pass in any props for right now. Call it menu and close that. Awesome. And now I have a button which is going to open my mobile draw menu. So now I have to add the draw here, which I am going to add outside of the V app bar, but inside of the div still, which is a V navigation draw. And then I'll close that. For right now, I'm just going to put anything inside of it. And to be able to show this on the page, I need to pass in a few props. So first, it shows and hides based off of vModel, which you can see in the JavaScript. I have draw equals false. So I'm going to vModel this to the draw variable. And then real quick, I'm just going to add a few more props here. The first one is I want it to come above the page. So I'm going to say it's absolute and it's temporary. And I'm going to position it on the right. Let's save that. And now, of course, we still have no way to open the draw. So I'll come back up here to the button and add an @click and stop propagation. And here I'm going to set draw equal to not draw to toggle from true to false. So let's try this out. Go ahead and press the menu button. Toggles the draw. I click outside. That functionality is given to me by Vuetify already. Awesome. Now let me open it back up. I see my buttons again. I can actually navigate with these already. So I have navigation set up. Now I go back down to the extra small and I have this open. So let me put the links in here now. And this time I'm going to go ahead and loop through the links that I have down here, which I could also change the main navigation items to do the same thing. So for this, I'm going to add another Vuetify component called vlist. And inside of vlist, I'm going to put vlist item. And in the list item, this is where I'm going to have a v4 and loop through those data items. So I'm going to say v4 equals item in items. Since I'm using a v4, I need a key here. I'm going to use the title of the item just because I only have a few and I know they're unique. And then I'm going to say to item.link. So that's going to be the routing. And then another prop that I have access to with vlist item is calling it a link. So there's a little bit difference in how it displays here. So let me go ahead and close vlist item. And let's see how this looks without doing anything further and just use item.title in here. All right, now I'll open the draw and you can see I have all three links and the navigation works. But on this main navigation, I have nice icons next to my buttons. And in the draw, I don't have the icons yet. So let's add the icons. There are actually a few nested components that we can use within the vlist item component. The first one is vlist item icon. And then inside of that, another Vuetify component, vicon. And I'm going to set the icon to small, just like I have in the other nav, and say fa dash. And then I have the name of the icon here. So I'm going to put that in JavaScript and say item.icon and close it, vicon, and then close the vlist item icon. Let's see how that looks. All right, that actually doesn't look bad. Let's see if this can look any better by using another Vuetify component. There's another nested component I can use inside of vlist item, which is called vlist item content. And then inside of content, I can say vlist item title. And then I can just use the item title here. Close that. And then close the vlist item content. Of course, if you have nested navigation in your draw menu, then you could nest it inside of the content here. Let's see how this looks. Looks pretty much the same either way. I think it's the exact same spacing and it works well. The icon looks nice. I think there's one more thing we can do here, or we can try. Let's see how this looks if we make this a dense list. So give it less spacing here. Let's see that. All right, so that would depend on our design preference. I don't think we really need dents here, but it still looks good. We only have 3 menu items, so I'm going to remove that. And I actually have a bug here, which it's not calling me out for, which I forgot to close vlist. Let's see if that makes any difference. I don't think so. Still looks good. All right, so that's the nav bar. We have it working on all screen sizes. The routing works, and the draw menu works. In the next video, we're going to start creating the homepage together. In this video, we're going to build out the homepage of this application. For reference, I'm including the mockups here and what this page will look like on the desktop screen size, for tablets, and also on mobile devices. I'm going to start with this header item here and then move on to the footer. And then I'm going to ask you to pause the video and code the midsection and at least make the best representation of this section and these cards as you can. And then finally, I'll show you my solution for coding this popular product section. So first, the header. Now this header has a lot of space around it, so I'm not going to use a standard container item. I'm going to use something that Vuetify calls a sheet, which is perfect for headers and banners like this. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll come into Views, Homepage. You can see I'm importing the 3 components already, header, popular products, and footer for the 3 sections of the page. If I come to Components and the Home folder, you can see there's nothing in these components either, so we have to build them out. So let me go ahead and display these components first. I'll put the header here, and then popular products, and then the footer. And now it's displaying the 3 sections. And now I can build the header if I come into the header file. Like I said, I'm going to start off with a vSheet component. vSheet, and then I will close it. Now vSheet takes a prop for height because there's going to be a lot of extra space above and below the centered text and also on every side. So I've already created heights for different screen sizes for the vSheet here. So I'm going to go ahead and add the prop. Call it height equal to that computed variable that I have, sheet height. This breakpoint object that Vuetify gives you is dynamic and will show you the name and size of the current breakpoint. So I'm checking for which breakpoint it is, and I'm returning the height based off of that breakpoint. All right, now inside of the sheet, I'm going to put an H1 tag, give it a typography class of text center and display one. I'll leave it like that for now, and I'm going to give it the header. Welcome to Awesome Shop. And close the tag. Looks pretty good. It's centered here, but it's not quite as much vertical space as I want. So I'm going to try to add a container to fix that inside of here. Now I want the container to fill the whole height of the sheet. Give it the Vuetify class of fill height. And I'll close the container. Now inside the container, I'm going to put a row so that I can vertically align this using flexbox classes. So I'm going to do vrow, and I'm going to say align equals center and justify equals center. All right, now indent those again and close the vrow. Awesome. You can definitely see there's more vertical space. Also, this is vertically centered. So there's a couple ways I could change the text size here. I could use something like this and say that if the Vuetify breakpoint name, then give it display 1, otherwise give it display 3 or something like that. Right now, I'm just going to copy this and make another element with display 3, and I'm going to say that this smaller one is hidden on the larger screen sizes, So small and up. And then the larger one will be hidden on small only. That's definitely not working. I think I have it backwards here actually, that this one needs to be 3 and this one needs to be 1. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Now the small one is on the small size and the large one on the large size. Looks good. Now let's add the footer. So the footer element, we always want to be on the bottom. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, we always want the footer to be right there, but not to be a fixed item. Vuetify actually handles this for us. So I'm going to come to this footer.vue file, and then here I'm going to add a v footer. Close it. Inside, I'm just going to paste the footer text, and it looks pretty good like this. Let me zoom out, zoom in, but you can see that if the page is too short, then it chokes the footer up to right below the other content. Now we want it positioned at the bottom of the page no matter what. So we can actually add a prop to the footer called absolute, and this will absolute position our footer at the bottom of the page always. The last thing I want to do is add just a little bit more padding here for spacing. So in footer, I'm going to add a class and say that I want padding all, and let's try 4, so that would be 16 pixels. And yeah, that's not so crunched up. I think that looks pretty good. So now we have the header on this page, we have the footer, we just need this mid section for products, which will be put in this popular products file. And you can ignore what's inside of the script tag for now. That's just to break up this component and then add some functionality for pop-ups after. So I want you to go ahead and take a look at the mock-ups here and see how the cards are displayed and how they look on different screen sizes. And at least try to do this large and medium screen size where there are vertical cards. If you look at the mobile screen size, the cards become horizontal, and we will write code for that a little bit later on. So pause the video here and try to code that section for yourself. All right, I hope you were able to code a little bit of it by yourself there without any trouble. Let's start filling in this section together, starting with the header of this section, popular products. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this div here, and instead I'm going to use a v container to wrap all of my elements. Inside of that, I'm going to have a v row, and then inside of that, I'm going to have a v column, and I'm going to give this column some breakpoints. So small, I'm going to say it's going to take up 10 out of 12 columns, and the offset on small screens will be 1. So it'll be offset from the left by 1 column. For medium screens and up, I want this to be 8 columns. And then for the offset on medium, I'll have it offset by 2. Inside of that, I'm going to put my header tag, just leave it as it is for now, and just say popular products. Close the header and then close all of these grid items. V row and close V container. Okay, looks pretty good. This is at an extra small size, so there's no offset here. If I go to a larger size, you can see there's a larger offset. And it kind of goes off the page. We'll have to fix that in a second. The next thing I'm going to do is add this view all text, which I'm just going to put it right next to the header, to the right of the header text. And I'm going to use a Vuetify text button for this. So let's say VBTN, I'll give it a link saying it's going to go to the store so you can view all the store items, and say it will be text and call it view all, and then close the button. Close VBTN. All right, that looks okay. You can see if I hover over it, there's a gray outline, but it should show up as blue, so it's obvious that it's a link. So let me change that here. Say color is primary. I also want to make it a little bit smaller, so let's go ahead and give it a small prop. Great, I think that looks pretty good. Still going off the page, but I think the overall text looks good. Now this is one row here. I'm going to make a row below that to put the cards in. I'm going to say V row. Inside of that, I will nest a V column and use these same widths and offsets from up here. And for right now, I'm just going to put some text inside, and I can change it in a second. So I'm going to close the column and then close the new row that I just made. All right, and now I can see I have card items in there. Great. I'm going to have to push the footer down or give more space for this item here. Let me see if a margin works for that actually. On V container, I'm going to add a margin bottom of 12. Okay. All right. So yeah, that does look better on larger screen sizes. Remember that 12 actually means 48 pixels because it's times 4. All right, so these two, this row with the header and then the card items row where the cards are going to go, both have the same offset, but inside of the row, I also want to have multiple columns showing each product. So I'm going to go ahead and create some nested rows and columns. And since there's just one row here, I'm going to let me get rid of this text. And I'll say V row and then put another V column inside. And now this V column is what I'm going to be looping over and putting the cards inside. So I'm going to say small is 6 wide, medium is 4, takes up 4 columns, and then every screen size larger than medium will also take up 4. Go ahead and close those. And it looks the same because I haven't added any new items inside the card, so you can't see that there's 2 or 3 cards there. So I'm actually going to take some objects out of my store that I already have there, and I have these products, these product objects in this array, which I am importing into my Vuex store. You can see I have this products available to me. Okay, so back in our component, I'm going to go ahead and put this on multiple lines. Now add a V4 in here. Product in, first I want the index here. So I'm going to say product in store.state.products.slice. And I'm going to slice from the 0 index to the 3rd because I only want 3 items in here to show up on the page. There's a lot more items actually in the products array in the store. Okay, and now that I'm doing a loop, I do need a key as well. And I know the product names are unique in this case, so I'm just going to do product.name as the key. Awesome, and now you can see that there are 3 cards here, which XML should be crossing all 12. Let me go ahead and add the card inside and come back to that. So here I'm just going to add a regular V card and give it the prop outline, so it's not elevated, it'll have the outline instead. Then I will close the V card. And inside of here, the first thing I want at the top is an image. So I'm just going to put that directly inside of the V card, put V image, and then I'll say the source is dynamic, and it will actually be the product.image. And I want my height to be 200 pixels to start. I'll close that. Below that, right here, now I need a card title, text, and an action button. So let me add those. So I can use the special V card title. And in here, I will say this is the product.name. and close vcard title. For the other text, I'm going to use the subtitle, so another vcard, but this time subtitle. And here I'll use product and put the price, so .price. And actually here there are no units on it, so let me just give it a $sign outside of the JavaScript and then close that. And now for the button, which I'm going to wrap. Let me just scroll down here. I'm going to wrap V card actions and put a button inside. So VBTN, and say the color is success. It's going to be an outlined button. And I'm going to add the @click action in a second. Inside of here, I'm just going to say add to cart and then close the button and close the V card actions. Great. Now it's displaying correctly. You can see I have a vertical card here. All three of them are stacked, and then if I make this bigger, it's now 2, and bigger, all three of them are on the same row, which I'm going to have to fix the columns a little bit there, but it looks okay. Let's say I switch some of the large and medium columns here. So instead of medium, I'm going to say this is applicable to large screen sizes, so it won't break after small. And let me change this one too from medium to large. That should give us some more space. Okay. So here is the large. Okay, and now it looks fine across all screen sizes. Great. The next thing I want to do is add the icon to the button. So I want a plus icon here. So let me add, inside of the button, I'm going to add V icon, and I'm going to get the font awesome icon called FA plus, and then close V icon. All right, so the icon's there. It is scrunched up against the text more than I would like. So what I can do is just give this icon the prop of left, and that pulls the icon away from the text a little bit and looks much nicer. Let me also try small and see if that looks any better. So giving the icon the prop of small, and I think that actually fits in with the text a little bit nicer. Great, so that's pretty much it for making a responsive homepage. We have the header, the items, and then we have a responsive footer at the bottom. Now, since we use these products on multiple pages, these product cards, I am going to pull the card item out of here, so this V card, and I'm going to put it in its own component here. So this is something very commonly done in front-end components, is to have the cards separately since you reuse card items a lot. And I've named one horizontal and one vertical. So this one is the vertical card where the image is on top of the text. And now I have to pass in the product here. And I actually don't need this third prop, the I, so I'm going to get rid of that. I do need the add to cart function, which I haven't added yet. And I need to pass in the product object for each product. So let me go back to popular products. I'm already pulling in the vertical product component here, and I have it registered. So all I have to do is go inside my column and say vertical product and pass in the product as a prop. It should be dynamic. Let me go ahead and close that. Oh, I forgot the T, so it's misspelled. All right, now it's working. So I have all the products. Now, one more thing I want to do is add a notification when they click the Add to Cart button. So there's some kind of user feedback here, and Vuetify has the perfect component for this, and it's called a snack bar. And I'm actually going to put the snack bar so it's globally available. So I'm going to put it down in the app.vue file, but inside of vapp. So just like you might put a globally available modal or pop-up or something like that, I'm going to put it right here. And I'm actually going to paste it in so I don't type out all of this code, but you can play around with it on your own. The important things inside this V snack bar are that it needs a V model Boolean. So true, it will show, false, it won't show. You can set the timeout, how long it wants to be on the screen, the color, and you are going to see what this does and how it looks like in just 1 second. And then I'll explain these other props. So from popular products, I already have this add to cart method, which basically just updates the number of items in the cart on the store. And it also sets this global snack bar to show true. And just real quick, we can look at that in store.js. And you can see I already have default colors or a default color, which is always green, always success, no errors. And then the default message. So in real life, I would be changing those two things, but here I'm just changing this Boolean right here. So let me hook up that button real quick. I'm going to take this add to cart method and pass it in here. Add to cart equals add to cart method. Save that. And now from my vertical product, I have the add to cart available to me. And so on the button, I'm going to add an @click event. Handle that with the add to cart method. All right, no errors. Let's see if this is working. I click add to cart and awesome. Success, item added to the cart. Now let's look back in this app.vue and look at the properties that I set. So the item stays on the page for 6 seconds, 6,000 milliseconds. This sets the green color or the success color that I have from the global state. Top and right mean that it will be in the top right of the screen. You can't really see that on mobile, but if I click it here, you can see it goes to the top and right of the screen. There are also props for bottom and left. And then multi-line means it can bleed over into the next line. Now, on a larger screen, it doesn't do this, but on mobile, you can see it goes into 2 lines. Inside of it, I've not only added the message, but I also have a button to optionally close it. Of course, it will close automatically after this set timeout, but the user can also close it, and then this just commits to the store to show false for the snack bar. Now, you can't have multiple snack bars open at the same time. In some applications, you'll see where these stack. You'll see multiple of these green boxes, but if I click on this multiple times, it's not going to add multiple. It has to wait for that one to disappear for a new one to show up. So if you need multiple, you'll have to modify it or get a different solution, maybe another library on top of Vuetify. All right, that brings us to the end of this homepage. In the next video, we will be building out the store page with the filters. See you there. In this video, we're going to be building out the store page of the application. I'm going to start here with some Vuetify grid elements. And first of all, wrap this page in a container. And now I'm going to have a row. And now I'll go ahead and close that row. And now let's refer to the store mockups. For the store page, you can see there are really 2 columns. One column for this filter sidebar, and then one larger column for all of the product cards and the product header. Now on this page, unlike the home page, these products will wrap continuously and not be in set columns because there could be just 3 products or there could be 100 products. So we want them to display all in the same row. And you can see how this looks on tablet and mobile with the filters on top instead of as a sidebar and then the cards below. So we're going to do that in this video as well. But we're going to start with doing one sidebar and the products below. So I'm going to create those columns, B column, and for now I'll set a small of 3 columns. So for small and up, And on large screens, I am going to want an offset here. And then I'm just going to write in sidebar here. And then I'll close that column. And now for the second column, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the other 9 columns for small. And I will say on large screens, let's try 7 columns, because we already have 3 columns on the sidebar, and that will give us 10 with an offset of 1. So there will be 1 extra space of empty column on either side on large screens. And here I'm just going to say products, and then I will close this column too. So let's look at it on small, and then on large screen we get that extra column offset on the side. I think that's okay for now. And you can see down here in the JavaScript, we're already importing the 2 components that we want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and turn both of these into components. And for products, it's going to be product display. And I won't be passing anything into these components. So let's go and make the product display first. I'm going to come over to components. In the store, I have the product display component. And I already have the label here, products, but I am going to wrap this in a header tag of h3. Now the Vuetify elements in this component are pretty simple. It's just a V row. I'm going to put a V column inside. I'm going to set the small prop to 6 columns. So there will be 2 cards side by side. Medium, let's try to do 4 columns. And then we need to loop over these columns. So I already have the products available to me on state, as you saw earlier. So I'm going to loop through the products here and say v4 equals product in store.state.products. And then because I have a loop, I need the key. So I'm going to do product.name again. And then inside, right now, I'm just going to put product.name. Close that V column. Now close the V row that it's in. Awesome. Don't worry about the display on extra small right now. But if you look, it's breaking correctly into columns here. And it also looks okay on small and large screen sizes as well. Okay, now instead of just the name, we want to display a card. But if you remember from the last video, we actually created the card component. We created the vertical card, and we're going to be using the same card on this page. So here we're already importing this vertical product. So I'm just going to replace the product name with the vertical product component. And then I'm going to pass in the product as product. And then just like last time, I'm also going to pass in the add to cart method as add to cart, and then close that. And you can see down here, I do have the add to cart method. And you can see the column displays correctly now that I have products inside. You can see I have 6 products there. And now when I make it bigger, it breaks at small into 2 columns, and then medium into 3 columns. I think that still looks pretty good. And then at large, you can see I have this extra space on the side. All right, that was pretty straightforward, right? Let's try the sidebar now. Now the sidebar is a little bit trickier because it's 2 different displays depending on the screen size. And we're going to use 2 different Vuetify elements for this. The first one is vSheet for the actual sidebar on larger screens. And the second one will be a V expansion panels. And for right now, I'm just going to put 1 panel inside here just so you can see. So V expansion panel, close that. And inside, there's yet another Vuetify component called the expansion panel header. Go ahead and copy this, close it. All right, and you can see my expansion panel opens and closes there. And for the V sheet, let me put some dummy content inside and call it sidebar. So now you can see sidebar and header. But we only want this expansion panel to show up if it's on an extra small screen size, or a small screen size actually. And then we only want this sidebar part here to show up if it's on medium or up. So we can actually use a v-if statement for this and use Vuetify's built-in breakpoints that it gives us. So for the sheet, we'll do v-if equals $Vuetify.breakpoint.md and up. And then I'll copy this and put it in the expansion panels, except I'll change this to SM or small and down. Okay, awesome. So now this expansion panel shows up on the small or extra small, and the sidebar shows up on medium or up. So although this works, I think what I'm actually going to do here is change this to v-else and then change this to small and up. I think that's a bit better. So now the sidebar shows up for small and up screen sizes, so small, medium, large, etc. And now this shows up on the extra small screen size. All right, so I want you to pause the video here and see if you can fill in everything that's missing for the sidebar and for the expansion panel. So for the sidebar sheet, you'll need to add some elevation as well as a radio button group with radio buttons inside. And for the extra small screen size, you can see the expansion panel. You will need to look in the Vuetify docs, and there's an option that you can add an icon to this. It looks kind of weird with no icon, just randomly expanding and contracting. So you can add one of those arrow icons, and then also add another element called V expansion panel content with the radio buttons inside. Note that you have access to this array to loop over, and these are the labels for all of your radio buttons, so you can use that as the labels. Now, the radio buttons won't be actually filtering these products at all. If you want to hook that up, go ahead, but it's not part of this course. These are just the labels for the Vuetify radio buttons that you'll need. Don't forget that you can also look at the mockups here to get an idea for what you need for each screen size. All right, pause the video here, and I'll be back in a second to code the rest of it. So how did you do? I hope you were able to get the content filled in there. So let's start programming with the extra small expansion panels. The first thing I'm going to do is change this in headers to be called filters. And then in the header, I'm also going to add that icon that I mentioned. So it's called an expand icon. And I'm going to say FA angle down. And you can see now I have an icon here. And when I open it, it's angled up. And when it's closed, it's angled down. Now I need a V expansion panel content. And I'm going to close that. And all of the content for this expansion panel is going to go inside of that element. So I'm going to add another Vuetify element called the radio group. And I need to model the radio button that's selected to something in state. So I'm going to say vModel and then equals something I already have in state called price. Filter. And then I'm going to set mandatory equals true. And you can see real quick down here, the price filter is 0, meaning that the default checkbox is going to be the first one at index 0. So it's going to be this any checkbox when I do my loop. So go back up to the radio group, and I'm going to close the V radio group. And now inside of here, I'm going to loop through radio buttons. So I'll do a V radio and then use V4 I'm going to say price and then I for the index in prices, which is on my state in this component. And then the key, I'm just going to use I. My label is price. And then value, I'm just going to say is the index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because that will match up to my default value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But you could have anything for the key and the value here, or for the label and the value. So now I'm going to close my radio button. Let's see if that works. All right, no errors. And it opens and I can see I have all of my radio buttons there with the default any selected. Now what I'm going to do for this V sheet is basically the same thing. So instead of putting this in another component, I'm just going to copy paste and put these radio buttons here, because it's basically using the same thing in the sidebar. Here I'm going to add the header. So I'm going to just add the H3 of filters for the sidebar. Let's see how that looks. Let me open it up. And now there's definitely the radio buttons and the header here, but there's no separation from the rest of the page. It's just random text on the page, it looks like. So let's try out some other props that we can pass into VSheet. First, let's try out elevation and pass in a number. So let's pass in 4. Okay, that looks okay. And now let's try to put some padding since everything is right up against the border. So let's use a padding class and say padding all of 8, which gives us a lot of padding. That looks okay. Although there are some screen sizes when this text is really squished. As you can see, this is the small screen size. So if we had the filters on top for the small screen size too, that would probably be better. And then just use the sidebar on the medium screen size. To do that, I would need to change to medium and up from small and up. And then also come in my views and the store.view. And let me change these to medium. So anything below medium, these will be full width. Let's try that out. That looks pretty good actually. That's on a small screen size, so maybe a tablet size. And now on medium, we get the sidebar. And then if you can see it on large, there's that extra column of spacing on either side. I think that looks pretty good. Now, in the components, if you go back into sidebar, there's lots of other props that you can play with for the sidebar. For example, tile. Let's see how that looks. That kind of squares the corners. If we wanted it square, like the rest of the page is pretty square with the header and all. But I think it looks a little bit better without the tile, so I'm going to leave that off. All right, so that's our first 2 pages. We have the home page and we have the store page completed. So go ahead and play around with the code. And in the next video, we're going to start coding the cart page. So let's get started with the cart page now. If you see on the mockups, the desktop screen size has 2 main columns. One for these horizontal cards, which we haven't made yet, and the other for this checkout form box. The tablet makes it a little bit thinner and uses vertical cards. And then on mobile, the checkout box moves on top and the cards stack below. So let's start off with this 2-column layout. Just like last time, we're going to start wrapping this in a V container, putting a V row inside, and then we'll use a V column, and we're going to have quite a few breakpoints here. So in small, let's say this is going to take up 8 columns, and then on medium, we're going to do 5 columns with an offset medium of 2. And then on large, we're going to do 4 columns and an offset large of 3, and then product list, and then I'll close it, v column. So the product list, by the way, is this empty component that I'm importing here from the carts folder in components. So I have product list, which right now is just a div that we'll edit in a minute. And the second column will be small of 4. And of course, X small, that means it'll take up all 12 columns. We'll go medium of 3 columns, and then close this. And then we'll close the V row, and then we'll close the V container. And then inside of here, we'll put the checkout box, which is that form box in the mockups. Okay, again, ignore the layout and X small for right now. And it looks pretty good. So let's start off with the checkout box. I'll go into Components, Cart, and Checkout Box. And now inside of this div, I'm going to have to add a V card and then close the V card. I'll just put Checkout Box in here. And you can see the card displays here, but it doesn't look great. There's no spacing, and it's also elevated instead of outlined like it is in the mockups. So I want you to pause the video here and go ahead and try to code the rest of this checkout box card. You've already seen the elements that you can nest inside of vcards, like vcard title and vcard text. So go ahead and try to make this look like the mockups, and I'll come back on to code this with you in just a minute. All right, so I hope that went well for you. Now let's start coding the rest of this card. And first, I'm going to get rid of the elevation by adding an outlined prop here. And now you can see it simply has a border instead of elevation. And if I come in the mockups, I can see the title says payment details, and then I have these 2 form fields, a total and a button at the bottom. So let me add the payment details first, and I'm going to use vcard title for that and say payment details. All right, that looks way better. Now I have spacing inside of the box, and this looks more like a header. So here I'm going to add the vcard text, and it doesn't only have to be text elements inside of here. This just positions it inside of the vcard element. So the first thing I'm going to add here is a paragraph, and I'm just going to hard code the total here for now. All right, and then after that, I'm going to add the VBTN with the color of primary. I know there aren't any colors on the mockups, but we can go ahead and assume it's a primary button. And then at click, we're going to call some kind of a checkout function. Now in the future, there will be a checkout route, but for right now, I'm just going to comment this out and say console.log checkout. So here at the at click, I will say go to checkout. Inside the button, I'm going to say checkout and then close the VBTN there. All right, that all looks good. Now I will add some inputs just at the top here, and I'm going to say v text field, and I'm going to leave it blank for now and then put another v text field. Good. Okay, those look okay there, but there's no indication as to what they are. So let me add a label in here. The first one, I'll say name, and the second one, I'll say email. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, if you look in the Vuetify docs, you can see props where you can make these inputs outlined if you want and put the name on top. There's about 6 different ways you can style these boxes by default. I'm just going to leave them how they are right now. Let's move on to product list for right now. We'll fix the spacing here in a minute. So inside of the product list, I'm going to get rid of the text in the middle, and then we want each item on a separate row. So here we can put V row and then loop through the items inside of the row. So we'll use a V4 for that, and then say V4 product in store.state.products. And I made a typo here. Okay, and then I'll set the key to be product.name again. Now inside, we're going to add our horizontal products. So I'm just going to put the product name there for now and close the row. Let's see if that's displaying correctly. Okay, and it's displaying all of the products. It's looping over them. And here you can see I'm importing this empty component horizontal product. So I'm going to go ahead and use that here. And you can see that inside of horizontal product in cards, it just says horizontal product. That's why it's displaying so many times here. So let me go to product list and go ahead and pass in the props that I need and then start editing that component. I'm going to need to pass in the product, so I have the product information. I do have a remove from cart method here that I'm not using now that I could pass in, but I'm going to leave that for now. And I'm going to pass in something called button action remove, because these cards will be used on different screens, and sometimes the button might say remove from cart and sometimes it would say add to cart. All right, and now I'll look at the horizontal product component. This is going to be another V card. I'm going to give it the prop outlined, and then I will close the V card. And now this one is a little bit different because it's not the standard card. Like you see, most of the card examples in Vuetify are these vertical cards where you have the title or an image on top and then the text and then a button on the bottom. That's pretty standard. But here we're doing this small thumbnail image on the side and then text and the button to the right. Fortunately, all of it can be handled in the styling classes that Vuetify gives us. So let's start off here with a div class of display flex. So we're setting this to display flex. And then inside of that, we're going to put a div as an image container. So we'll say v image and the source of the image, because we have access to product on our props that has been passed in. So we'll say that's product.image. And I already know I want the width of my image to be 120 and the height will be 120 as well. So let me close that div and then close this outer div. Okay, so the images are displaying. Everything's a little bit off right now. So below this image container, we're going to make another container, and it's going to be div with a couple classes here. So a class of display flex again. We're going to say flex column because we want all of this stuff inside this container to stack vertically in a column. So we'll say flex column, and we're going to justify center. Inside of here, I'm going to put the card classes. So I'm going to say vcard title, and I already know I want to remove the padding from here. So I'm going to say padding top of 0. And then the card title will be the product.name. So close the vcard title. And then let me add the subtitle here before I save it in preview. So it was card subtitle. In here, I'm going to do a $sign and then the product dot price. Close the vcard subtitle component. Now I'm going to close that div. Okay, this is really small, but you can see it looks pretty good like this. Of course, there are some layout and design issues. We'll fix those in a minute. Let's just add the button real quick. So below subtitle, we're going to add a VBTN. We're going to give it a color for right now of error. because this button is going to say remove from cart. This is going to be an outlined button. And then for right now, let me just see how it looks like this. Let's add remove from cart text and then close the VBTN. So you can see that it's outlined. Of course, it's smashed up against the edge. And also, I would like an icon to the left of the button. So let me add an icon on this button real quick. I'm going to add it with a V icon. I'm going to say small and then left. If you remember, this will pull it away from the text to the left. And the button I want is the minus sign for remove from cart. So FA minus and then close the V icon. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now the button is kind of large in proportion to the text. So I'm going to come up here and give the button a prop of small as well. Okay, that looks a bit better. Of course, the button is still smushed up against the image. So let's add a class here to give it some margin. So margin left of 4. We got 16 pixels of margin, and that exactly lines up with where the text starts over here. Let's see how this looks. Okay, that's not bad. But the button is still going all the way to the edge. And what's happening is this card is only filling the space it needs to. But we actually want the card to extend a little bit out here. So we're going to tell it to fill up the width of the parent container. So we're going to come back up here and say we want to set a min width of 100%. Let's see how that looks. Now the card looks much better, but we need some space on the left and on the bottom. So let's set a class here for margin bottom of 5 and padding all of 4. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now the spacing in between cards looks good, and there's some spacing in between the image and everything. Now, if you notice in the mockups, the payment details form is actually on the top above the cards. But if you look at how our app is breaking right now, you have all the cards and then the payment details at the bottom. So we're actually going to use some push and pull classes that Vuetify provides us to move around the elements at the extra small breakpoint. So let me go back into the cart page. And in this column, I'm going to set something called order, an order prop, and pass it an argument of first, meaning it's going to be the first in the order for all screen sizes. But I'm going to overwrite that for small and say order small equals last. This will push it to the top on the extra small screen size. Let's save that. And now you can see the payment details at the top because it's ordered first. But once we hit that small breakpoint, now it's ordered last. In the next video, we're going to complete this application by doing a little bit of work on the checkout section. In this video, we're going to build a simple checkout flow. You can see it in the mockups here. It's a Vuetify component called a stepper. And as you can see, it steps you through the different things you need to do in the checkout flow. So let's get started building this. In this checkout component, again, the first thing I'm going to do is add a V container inside a V row. And then there's really only one column that I'm going to add here. For small screens, I'm going to say that it's 6 columns wide, and the offset for small will be 3 columns. So for extra small screens, it will be the full width of the page, and for small and up, it's going to take up half the page. Okay, let me go ahead and close that. And now inside of here, I'm going to add the V stepper. And I need to use a V model directive here. I'm going to give it step, because if you look in the data, I have this step variable starts at step 1, and that's going to denote the current step. I will close the V stepper. And now inside, I pass in 2 elements. I have the V stepper header, and I have the V stepper items. In the header, I add the steps by saying V stepper step. The first step will be step 1, and that's going to add this kind of circle for me. And I don't want any other words there or any other title actually, so I'm just going to close the V stepper step, and I'm going to save that real quick. Now to demo our page, we don't have checkout in the menu options, so the only way to check out is through this button, but it's not hooked up, it's just logging the word checkout right now. So to make that button route to the checkout, I'm going to have to come to the cart page, and it's my checkout box that's handling that. So let me go into components, cart, and checkout box. Then I have this button, go to checkout. And down here, the router is commented out. So let me get rid of the console.log and save the routing. Okay, so now if I hit checkout, it goes to the checkout page. All right, I'll click checkout. And you can see this blue circle here with the 1. That's because we have denoted a step 1 in the header. All right, so I'm going to copy this and do 3 steps. I'll do step 2 and step 3. Now I have 3 steps here. And if I come down here and I change the current step to step 2, you can see now step 2 is highlighted and the other 2 are grayed out. Now there is a way for you to check off the steps as you go. Put a check mark there. Vuetify has this built in. Let's go ahead and set that up with the complete prop. I'm going to put these on new lines so it's a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to say complete equals step is greater than 1. Save that. Okay, now it looks the same, but if we change this step, the current step, to step 2, now you can see instead of being grayed out, it is now just blue. And I'm not sure why the check mark isn't there right now, but we can debug it in a minute. So I'm going to copy this 2 more times and now change to step 2. When it's greater than step 2, this is completed. And step 3 is the last step, so I don't need a completed prop there. And I'll save that again. Okay. And now I will turn step 2 back to step 1. The only other thing I want to do in the header is to add lines in between these elements to connect the steps. So I'm going to do that in between the steps here by adding a V divider. And then in between this step, I'm going to add a V divider. Now, a V divider is a Vuetify component you can use anywhere in your application to add a line. And when you're using it inside of a stepper header, it's specifically styled to fit perfectly in between the numbers in your stepper. All right, let's work on the stepper items now. So for each item, you'll call it V stepper content, and you're going to denote which step it is. So for step 1, I'm just going to put step 1 inside, close that, and you can see step 1 appears below. I'm going to copy this for the other steps. And now I'll do step 2 and step 3. Let me go ahead and change the step in data. Awesome. You can see step 3. All of that works. So now you can see that I am bringing in these 3 components, which correspond to step 1, step 2, and step 3. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the stepper content here with those components. And to save some time typing, I'm going to copy paste them into here. So you can see I have contact info, shipping info, and review. Let me save that. Right now, they're just all displaying because I haven't denoted which step these are, and the components are not yet set as vStepper content. So let me go into those components in checkout. And the first one, contact info, is just a div right now. So I have to get rid of this div. And I'm going to replace it with vStepper content. Say step 1. Now inside of here, I'm going to have a couple text fields, which I'm going to paste in here and then kind of explain what they're doing. We've already looked at the basic Vuetify text fields and how they work. This is a typical standard material pattern. From the checkout page, we're passing in 3 things. We're passing in data, rules, and next, which is a function that we're going to use for our button. So data is just to v-model these form items off of. You can see I have all of the different data items. Now, rules is something you can use when you're using Vuetify form elements and you don't want to pull in a third-party validation library or do your own custom validation. You have the option to make rules object, and each rule is basically a function where you get the current value and you can test if the value meets your expectations. If it doesn't, so if this function returns false, then it's going to show the user this string. That's the error message it gives. So it's a pretty straightforward pattern. Of course, for some more complicated strings like emails, you'll be writing a lot of regex or using a big regex block here because there aren't built-in defaults for Vuetify validation. You're basically using JavaScript and regex to test and then just return a message. And you can see it handles it by default, returning the message and saying that it's required for the email. You can see it's an invalid email. And once I type in a valid email, that goes away. So that's really nice that I can just pass in a rules array of rule functions, and then it handles the validation for me in these form elements. This also works with third-party libraries. You can use vValidate, Vuelidate, etc. So let's add some buttons to the bottom. We'll take care of this extra text in a second. I'm going to say VBTN, give it a color of primary, and at click, I'm going to say next, call the next function that I'm passing in. Since it's the first step, I'm going to say continue to the next step, close the button, and I'm also going to make a cancel button here. So I'm going to say VBTN. I'm going to say this is a text button, and at click, if they want to cancel, I'm going to take them out of checkout. So I'm just going to use the view router object to do that. So view router dot replace, and then pass it the name of the route, which is cart. Close that. Okay. And now I'm going to say this button is cancel. Close the button. Let's see how that looks. Pretty good. So we have the continue button and we have the cancel, which takes them back to the cart page. If I click checkout again, it takes me back to checkout. Let's see what continue does. All right, it takes me to step 2, but we have no way of going back. So I'm just going to hit back in the browser, go back to checkout, because we have to set up the second component now. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll come into shipping info, and here I'm going to, again, replace the div with vStepper content and say this one's step 2. And inside again, I'm going to paste my text fields. It's pretty much the same thing you've already seen. There's vModel label rules and it's set to required. And then I'm going to close vStepper content. Let's see how that looks. Okay, when it saves, it goes back to the regular checkout URL because these steps aren't saved in the URL, it's in state. And since state restarts on every refresh, we lose our current state, but that's okay. I'll just hit continue and it takes us to step 2. Notice it gives us a nice transition animation in between steps, just out of the box. Now, if you look at step 2, we have 2 functions. We have next and previous, which makes sense for a step 2 as a middle because you can go back or forth. So I'm going to add 2 buttons here too. Again, I'm going to give this the color of primary and say @click equals next and say continue here and then VTN. And this next button, instead of cancel, it's going to be go back to the first step. Still going to be text @click. It's going to use the previous function and say go back. All right, so at the first step, we have continue. And at the second step, we can continue or go back. So that works well. Let's move on to the third step. Go to review. And again, here, I'm going to replace it with vstepper content. Step equals 3. And inside of here, I'm going to show them all the information that they entered throughout the form so that they have a chance to review. For this, I'm going to use a vlist. I'll leave it like that for now. And for the sake of time and typing all of these Vuetify elements, I'm going to paste in the innards of the list. So I have a subheader here, which shows the title of the list. And then I have the list group and list items inside. So I'm looping through all of the data, which was modeled from the form elements throughout this, and displaying it for the user to see. And so here I'm going to close the vlist, and I'm going to close the vstepper content. Save that. Okay, so now I'm on step 1. I hit continue. I'm on step 2. Hit continue. And now I can see a review of all my order. So if I refresh, let's go back here. I'm going to enter my name, sample.com, continue, and you can see it shows me exactly what I've typed in here. Now the weird thing about this review is that I can click on this, but it doesn't do anything. So I actually want to disable this list so that you can't click on these items because they're not clickable. So let me go to vlist and pass it some props. So the first thing I'm going to do is say it's disabled. Save that. Let me go ahead to the third step, and now you can see it's not clickable. It's just showing up as a list. Now these are also really far apart. So I'm going to also pass it the dense prop. Go back to my list, and that looks much better. Smaller and more compact. Now, at the end here, after the list, I'm going to add my buttons, and since they're pretty much the same, I'm just going to paste them in. The submit button calls the submit order function, and then this just calls the same previous function for go back. So I'll save that. Now I can navigate through the steps, go back, go forth. Let's see what submit does. Takes you to a thank you page, and we can see this thank you page here basically just says thank you, because from the checkout page in methods, it's just pushing the route thank you, which takes you to this component. Just for fun, let's style this a little bit and add a few things. So I'm going to add a class here for text center, which is a Vuetify class. Now the text is centered, and you can see down here I have a variable called overlay. So when they click submit, let's add something that shows them that their order is processing. So there's a component called vOverlay. To give it a Boolean value, so let's give it overlay, which basically tells it whether or not to display true, false. And I already know I want a class of flex column here. Now inside of this overlay, I'm going to put a paragraph that just says processing order ... Okay, and let's close the V overlay, and I'm just going to set this to true so you can see what it looks like. Okay, you can see that the overlay actually just displayed for 3 seconds and then it disappeared. That's because I have this set timeout here that says after 3 seconds, set this.overlay to false. Otherwise, it would just keep the overlay in perpetuity. And actually, I don't need to set it manually to true because I'm already doing that on before mount. So I'm going to set this back to false. And it still works. Okay, now that we have an overlay, let's add a progress bar here. I want a circular progress bar. I could also do a linear progress bar, but the circular one will work well for this. So circular, and I can set the size here. So I want size 64 and then close that. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Okay, you can definitely see the circle, but it's not moving because we're not giving it a current progress. What we want to do if we want it to continuously move is set the indeterminate prop. And you can see it's spinning now. But once the order is done processing, we want to show some kind of thank you on the page again. For this, I'm going to add a container here, say v container, and I'm going to say that this container displays if overlay is false, meaning the order is not processing anymore. So I'm going to say not overlay and then close the v container. Okay. And then inside, I'm just going to paste my thank you. So it's processing. And now, awesome, I have this thank you message. So that's it for this application. Now, if you look through the mockups, you will see there are certain features that can be improved upon and things we didn't get to in this tutorial. For example, on tablet view, these cards are vertical and they're horizontal here, but we just have them horizontal on every view. Since the Scrimba interface is interactive, I encourage you to take this opportunity and go back through this repo and try to see what improvements you can make on my code. Please continue to the next video for a brief conclusion of this course. You have made it to the end of this Vuetify course. I hope you learned something and now feel confident to start building applications with the Vuetify framework. If you liked this course, I make lots more videos on my YouTube channel called Faraday Academy. And definitely feel free to reach out to me with any questions or feedback you might have. Don't forget that all of the code samples used in this course are available at these links on github.com. Thanks for watching and have a great day.